would be they're so not privy to it that it could happen tomorrow and they're not ready in the least for dealing with it. And so they're
Well,
going to
yeah,
panic.
the other thing too is like, Lenny's really, in some ways he's lucky because he got an education, and he can read, and he knows what things mean and what is being said. And if you haven't had any kind of education in the education system, then it's going to be, even for me when I was like, learning law, and the legal term is way different than the, Webster term. You could have the same word, but, depending on how it's used and if it was used in law, it means something totally different than what it means in the Webster dictionary. So even if people could have read this, this thesis or hypothesis or whatever that was done, and it's obviously public, right? You can pull it publicly. And the reason they don't try to hide this stuff is because most people, if they read it, wouldn't understand what it said in the first place. And so we have a whole problem of, not so much people are illiterate, but they're illiterate to language and how it's used. And so a lot of them don't really understand the world that they're kind of operating in. And so you couldn't read a document like that, and try to figure out what the main idea was. I mean, that hypothesis or thesis done by those doctorates were, it was like 30 pages long, I think, by the time it was done. And having to read through it and trying to figure out, okay, what is the key point here? What's going to happen? And having to read through the whole thing to figure what it was. And I probably had to read that document like 5 times.
Oh, even more, because if you go back to a document and you take each sentence out of the context that it's in, it can have different meaning than when it's in the context. And so the whole way that legal documents are created,
or educational documents on the PH level, I mean, they're kind of in that the way that they're written, the language.
Yeah, plus there's gatekeepers. And the gatekeepers will not allow things that are not in agreement with the story as presented. And so we really do have a problem in the fact that the fake education system has been with us our entire lifetimes, and that people tend to believe what they were taught in school and in college especially, and that we have to question it to see if it's actually true, because there's a lot of things that are happening now that tell us that we've been lied to deliberately over the years. And we know that things like history are written by the victors of the wars. And so there is enough history out there that I've been exposed to that now I'm seeing it come back again. And people who don't understand the past are doomed to repeat it. And we've had so much hidden from us because of the beliefs that we were given, taught to us. And you know how when you were a child, you were free to play and imagine things? That world that you imagined is still there, but you haven't been back to it for so long because you're dealing with the world that's been created for us. But the world created for us doesn't work the way it was explained, not in physics, not in chemistry, not in biology. I don't think it works the way it was explained in sociology, psychology, history, or that. I think the humanities level of things has gotten so far off human scale that we really need to pull everything in our knowledge base back and look at how it affects humans on human scale. Now, as I say that, I'm noticing.
I'm just going to say, like,
Yeah, go.
history is, well, I mean, a lot of the stuff that our reality is based on, right, is complete and total fraud. Because history is, and when I dated that, blue blood, he was like going to get his I think he was getting his doctorate in 21st century history, mechanized war, basically. Anyway, but I mean, the deal is that all history was one person's perception. So if that individual wrote that book about this, then that was his perceived reality. And then anybody who wasn't there in the future, who decided to write a book on books that they read about people that were there, right? You can see how it becomes fiction over time. And it's somebody's perceived reality of what's going on, you know, maybe in that war zone, you know, what was going on, you know, in that particular moment, whether it was, you know, a journalist or somebody who, you know, was writing about it or whatever else. So it was their perception. So it doesn't make the perception correct. You know, this is why I think there's a lot of battle going on with the whole Holocaust kind of idea. And that the Holocaust happened, but it wasn't as they're seeing, a lot of people now are seeing it wasn't as severe as has been played out, right? That it was, you know, I mean, it happened. There were really bad things that happened, but it wasn't as severe as, because there's a lot of countries now that are looking back into their records of, you know, if they had Jewish concentration camps and, you know, what were the real numbers of, you know, maybe how many people died or, you know, when they got let out, how long they were there, and different things. And it's not really meshing with the mainstream international projection of the Holocaust, right? So we kind of, you know, there's, and I hate to use the word fraud, but the thing is that it's a perceived reality. And sometimes, you know, even one person, you know, they say that like 5 people could be watching an event. Say, for example, you could see a car, you could all be standing on the same corner, and you could see a car crash into another car. And, you know, none of them will have the same story about what happened or what color the cars were or, you know, which one came from where or exactly how they were hit. You know, if you talk to these people after and they relay the events back, not one person in those 5, even though they were at the same place at the same time watching the same event in the same moment, when they leave, all will have a different story of it. So anybody who's writing history or, I don't know, I guess sociology to some extent, some of their stuff, or religion, or a lot of these different things may not have been an actual accurate representation of what happened. And it could even be
gross misrepresentation.
What's that?
A gross misrepresentation of what actually happened.
Yes, that's awesome. That's exactly a gross, because it's in their own mind. And they say this spiritually too with channelers. You know, I'm against channeling. I think the beings that are being channeled are not light beings at all. And I have experiences in those areas. So I'm basing it off of my experience. But a lot of times that, you know, channelers are only channeling the information that their filters can manage, can handle. And I know with work that I do with people, with shamanism, they use the stream, that's what I call it. Some people, I think, I don't know, I use a stream of information and data. But because that stream doesn't have words, there's no words in that stream that deal with like our language, they will throw things in there like he, they, she, to convey information about the data that they're putting forward. But there is no he, she, they, right? Because it's just information. But because there's a lack of language, that when this information filters through, they kind of have to add different kinds of words on so that you can get a bigger, or, you know, things like that, so that you can get a bigger, broader picture about what the stream or the energy is trying to convey, or the information, the data. So you know, your perceived reality of who you are, what your world looks like, what happens, events, or whatever else, is also based on your own preconceived notion as the writer, if you write those events. So it also can be a gross representation, right, of the information because of how the individual is seeing it and experiencing it.
Although, is it? Because if the individual is seeing and experiencing it in the sense that they are, that makes it very real to that individual. And we might not be getting 360 degrees around the circle, but the individual interpreters definitely need to have their own voices, and those voices need to be heard from a micro scale, just as all the voices together create the human morphology at the macro scale.
Right, but it doesn't mean that we should believe it.
Oh, of course not.
You know, we should also contemplate that information. For example, there are a lot of visions and prophecies, you know, in the Native American and also other indigenous cultures worldwide. Native people. I'm sorry, I just called them Native Americans. A lot of them don't like that term, so I'm going to backstep and call them the Native indigenous people. So, you know, for example, there was a prophecy that was given by a woman who talked about the webs in the sky. Okay, so this is a while back. And so her interpretation of the vision she was shown from the information were these webs in the sky.
Right? Oh, so she was looking at chemtrails.
What's that?
So she was looking at chemtrails, eh?
Yeah, and so that's what I believe. I mean, who knows? That's how I interpret it, right? That's my interpretation of that information.
Makes sense to me.
It's not widespread. Yeah, it's not widespread information because people can't relate it to their world, you know, because most people don't see chemtrails, right? Literally, you can have people look up in the sky and it's like they don't really even see it. It's like they have a filter or a block towards seeing certain things.
Well, that brings me to the question of whether we live, whether all the people actually live in the same reality. And I'm not sure we do. But I noticed that there's 20 minutes left, and I want to take the time for you to run through your website and your contacts and the radio shows and all the information that we like to give before the end of the show, because the show will end and we'll be caught by surprise.
Okay, here we go. You can find me at Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff on Facebook. YouTube channel is Consciousness of Economics and Urban Farm Project YouTube channel, and Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. I'm in Studio A, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, carrying stones and digging holes. And you can reach me at consciousnessofelconomics@gmail.com, or go to my website, coe-llc.com, and there's lots of stuff on there. And
you're on Steam It now too, right?
Sort of. I'm kind of like
taking a break.
Steam It just is not that great. I think there's like games on Steam It, and they make all the money, and you know it's weird. It's kind of weird how it works. And you know I haven't really made any Steam It since Coinbase stole all my Steam It, so I'm kind of like. I'm not really. I put stuff on Steam It under Bridgette, Bridgenit, but I haven't put anything up for like a month. I just really got disgusted.
Lost interest.
Seriously lost interest.
Yeah, I'm on Steam It, steamit.com at Lenny Thyme, and so people can still follow me there. And I'm doing a mostly daily blog, although I notice I haven't blogged in 3 or 4 days, but I'm on the road. I'm currently in Northern California dealing, and things are going fine. It's a nice life. But I wanted to make sure that we had that, and Everybody's listening to Steampunk Radio. This is The New Way. I'm Dr. Lenny Thyme, your host. This is Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff, your guest. And we're just talking about the things we usually talk about and trying to walk a different path through the world that doesn't involve all the different things that most people's current world involves. And so we sometimes get caught in the minutiae of detail of what's going on in the world. But I know Bridgette and I both walk our own paths, and that if our path doesn't take us out into the world, we're perfectly content with being in the inner world, where there's a lot more to be revealed the more time you can spend there. And so I've now picked up my original copy of Carlos Castaneda and the Teachings of Don Juan, and it is in my backpack, so that's going to be my reading material for the ride home tomorrow if I get on a bus.
Awesome.
So
I love Carlos Castaneda. I mean, I love Don Juan, actually. I love Don Juan and his entourage for sure in the books. Yeah. So I just want to leave. Let's just leave this. I just want to kind of go back to a story that some people have heard.
Okay.
If anybody, I'm not a big The Secret, which is a DVD. It's a spiritual thing about your perceptions and your beliefs or whatever. I think they have it on Netflix. It's pretty old now, 20 years old or something like that, maybe older.
Yeah, I've seen it, and there's a couple versions of it.
Yeah, so one of the stories they talk about is basically a story about if you don't know about something, you don't have an understanding about that something, you literally cannot see it at all. It doesn't even show up on your radar. And so there's a story about this on the East Coast. I forget, what town. And this is actually a documented story. But there was a shaman, probably medicine man, and of a tribe. And he was sitting up on a mound overlooking the ocean in their area. And he noticed some changes, some anomalies in the waves and the water in these particular areas out in the ocean a little bit. And all he could see was how strange the water looked in those spots, and he couldn't figure out what it was. And so he came back off and on for like about 3 weeks, and he would sit and he would watch the water trying to figure out what was going on and how strange it was, because this person would have known everything in his environment, how things work and how things are, and weather and wave patterns and a lot of these things. I mean, because these people were very, very aware, right, of their surroundings. And so it took him like 3 weeks. And then finally, after 3 weeks, he saw the ships. So these big, Christopher Columbus type ships, were out in the water, and they were anchored there. And so that's what he saw, was the anomaly in the water. But because he'd never seen ships like that, they were totally he couldn't visualize them, he couldn't see them at all. And it took 3 weeks of continuing to pay attention to actually, be able to see what was there, which were these large ships. So even under the best awareness and the best consciousness, if it's not in our wheelhouse, it's not something we grew up with, it's not something that has been in our environment, it may take us quite a bit of time to actually be able to see what needs to be seen. Like, I believe that there are extraterrestrials walking around. I mean, not just walking around amongst us where you could see them. I think the majority of them are not visible to us, but they walk right past us.
Yeah, there's frequency ranges The frequency range that humans on Earth live in is an extremely narrow range, and there's nothing that says that consciousness can't be totally similar on, say, a microbe level, where every single bacterium in our body is an existing individual at that scale. And if you think about how that would work, what would human scale on that level be like? You could imagine something very much similar to Earth with some different characteristics happening. So I think that if we are expanding our frequency range, which I think we are because I can see much more distinct amount of colors lately, and other physiological changes, maybe Earth and human scale is a variable in different size dimensions that moves through space and time differently depending on what the humans need to address, and that the function of Earth is very similar in parallel universes, but then there are perpendicular universes that sometimes take you to a completely different scale, and the laws of physics don't have to be the same in non-adjacent scales. And so we're seeing phenomena that we call non-local phenomena, which means we can't explain it through our cause and effect. And so anytime somebody talks about non-local phenomena, it just means it happens. We don't have a good explanation for it. And when you take that attitude towards it, most of all phenomena is non-local, but it's a probability distribution created for each and every one of us based on who we are, what we think, and what we expect to do. So if you know yourself, you know that most of the time you'll take the probable choice, but some people like you and I like taking paths less traveled, and so something comes under our notice and we don't know how it works, and so we're down a rabbit hole before we even know it's a rabbit hole. And so I've been watching a lot of things happen and feeling like I'm not really in the sphere of things because I've been out in nature in the land of Oz for so long that I lost track of the human existence except what was presented to me on YouTube. And all of a sudden I get out into the real world of existence, and it's nothing like the microcosm that I live in, because I had brought the old world with me into the microcosm, and the new world with all these people have changed. And so the Mandela effect that we've been talking about could just be that my reality is somewhere on a past timeline, and that the current timeline has shifted gears, and I've got different timelines going at different paces, different frequencies, because I'm usually not at the lower density that most of the humanity currently is. It's why you can look at the television and see how Rachel Ray is now a gray caricature of herself. That's almost the way all people look to me when I'm dealing with real people out in the world. And so I'm glad I'm where I'm at. I don't have to deal with many people here, but I've had to deal with more people here than in the land of Oz. And it's a good change because I've forgotten how great people are one-on-one when you really get to meet somebody and can talk with them for a couple hours, and you don't have the constant noise box reproaching you and telling you what you have to focus on. Although I do notice that if there's more than, say, 3 people in a room, and the conversation goes quiet, somebody feels the need to turn on one of those noise boxes. anyhow, is all good. So, thank you for coming on and being the guest this morning. Tomorrow morning, I've got Ron Higgins coming on, and Ron is the mayor of North Frontenac up in Canada. It's a town that is going to complete contributionism. And yeah, and we're going to talk about it. I'm going to interview him on Skype. And so I'm thinking about not having it run through the Discord room and just doing it direct on Skype, because I only have Discord on the tablet, and Discord and the Skype don't work together very well. So
can you Skype onto Steampunk?
Yeah, I can Skype onto Steampunk, but I can't do it through Discord. And so what I'll do is I'll do it the same way I'm doing it through here, but I'll do it with a conversation on Skype. And if I had a microphone, life would be so much easier. So that's going to be my manifestation for today, is to try and find myself a cheap little microphone that I can plug in so that the audio sounds better when it does get on air. Because I was listening to some of the recordings that I had made of the previous shows, and your shows with me always came out good. But other people, it's hard to hear the guest. And the show with Rich and Alan Miller is like virtually unintelligible. Somehow I'm not surprised with as many different gadgets.
On all my shows, I always wear a headset.
Yeah.
And I think that helps, at least on my end.
I'm sure it does.
Because I think if you just talk to your computer, the way people move around and stuff, and you hear sometimes and not so much other times, and going on in the background, the washing machine,
In the land of Oz, there's not, the only disturbances tend to be the cats or Izzy the Wonder Dog.
Right.
So,
like when you have guests on, I think that sometimes when they're talking to their computer and they have all their background noise going on.
Oh yeah. It wipes out things.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I've noticed too, if you have earplugs and a microphone, that it doesn't take as much. I don't know if this is right or not, but it doesn't seem to take as much bandwidth, I think, because when you have all this background noise going on, I think it takes more bandwidth and it makes the vocabulary unintelligible. Do you know what I mean? Because it slows it down or pauses it, or things like that. As
the electronics are wonky. And the more distance there is between the audio and the video, or where the sound goes in the microphone and what's coming out. But I know that from the system I normally use, I can hear myself back in the radio when I replay the MP3, and it isn't a problem at all. But the guests, when I've been playing the MP3s, some of them show up clearly, some of them don't show up clearly. So you're probably right. It's a matter of whether the guest is using a microphone and a headset or not. And I think I'm going to set up a studio where I do have a microphone and a headset. And so I actually spent a few days working and getting paid for it, so that now I have the cash to get a few things that I needed. And a microphone and a headset, even something in the $25 to $30 range, will help immensely from not having anything at all. But I tried a set of earbuds one time, and I don't know, they're just not comfortable. And I find it weird walking around with things in my ears trying to listen and do stuff. And so this idea of people being attached to their mobile phone and actually being mobile when they use their phone is, I'm Michael Smith in Stranger in a Strange World. I don't understand that sort of behavior. But that's a book, if you haven't read in a long time, to go back and read. Robert Heinlein wrote it in the 1950s. And so much of the fiction that we grew up on, both science fiction and fantasy, seems to have been incorporated into the real world right now, so that people believe enough of it that some of it seems true. And so I wonder how much fiction of the past is really true but couldn't get past the gatekeepers and the people who allow things to be published if it was called fact. So the author just went ahead and called it fiction, just like I'm calling my stuff crypto fiction, because as crypto fiction it can get out there. But if I call it hot and heavy science, they want all sorts of proofs based on stuff that I don't really believe has been proved. And we've been given a lot of stuff in our university system that they tell us, it's proved, deal's done, like climate change. You know as well as I do that climate change under normal circumstances is something that has a lot of different variables. But climate change, when the military controls the skies and can spray anything they want, or is it the military? Is it the sub-military? Who actually is doing the spraying? And what is the agenda? And why does it have to be made visible in an area when it's not really necessary? But yet, if it hadn't been made visible, we wouldn't be onto it, and we could be being poisoned like we are with the radiation and never even know it hit us. So I think that the way to deal with everything is to just create a concept of your own reality where you have the ability to mitigate energy, and you take your energy and you keep it in your own ground state where you feel comfortable. And when you find energies that take you out of your comfort zone, you manifest something that takes that energy and transforms it into something useful. And you walk on many different paths. You're one of the best people I know for transforming energy from one scale to another. We've got a minute left in this. Would you like to say anything more?
Well, thanks for having me on this morning. Sorry I was late, but I'd been traveling for, 3 weeks or something like that.
Late's not a problem. Time is not real.
Yeah, yesterday I finally made it back to the desert.
All right. Did I lose you?
Scheduling time. Let's just say.
Yeah.
Time of scheduling. So I'm trying to get back into that and get organized. But it was a good trip.
Okay, we just went off air. I noticed something really interesting on the radio station clock as I was going off air. It went from the live time to 21:58, the time for the next broadcast, and it dropped an entire minute. Just like there was no 21:59 minute at all. It went just to 29:58. There's been some real weird synchronicities in clocks and stuff, but I gotta go turn off the station now that we're done with the show. And